Um, Today's devotion comes from the every time I mispronounce it, the Smalcald Articles, set part 3, Article 12. Don't have 12 fingers, otherwise I would have put 12 fingers up. And it is concerning the church. And what it is at the time of the writing, the Catholic Church was making the argument that they were the church, and outside of them was not the church. And Luther is saying here that, well, and the way he actually phrases it is, even a 7-year-old child knows what the church is: holy believers and sheep who hear the voice of their shepherd. And he makes this distinction. He says the church doesn't consist of surplices, tonsures, long albs, or other ceremonies. It exists in the Word of God and true faith. But I want to use this. Luther wrote separately 7 marks of the church. This is something that he worked on. And this is what identifies the church. This is what a church needs to have. And here are the 7 things that, and this is in addition to the Smalcald article, obviously. But kind of, what does it take to be church? What does it mean to be church? He says, well, first, it's the Word, right? The Word of God has to be at the foundation. The second and third are the two sacraments, baptism and the Lord's Supper. If the church isn't performing these sacraments, isn't giving access to these sacraments, it's not really the church. The next one is discipline, which we talked about a few days ago when we did excommunication. God's people, or holy Christians, are recognized by the office of the keys, applied publicly. If a Christian is in sin or sins, he should be disciplined. He should be taught. And if he doesn't mend his ways, then he should continue to be disciplined until he does. And if he does mend his ways, or she does mend her ways, there should be forgiveness there. So to be the real church, you have to be willing to call out sin and to work to overcome it. The next is the office. The church has to have a pastor. He says this. He says if there's no pastor, if there's no one called to that position, it's not the church. And that can look a lot. It can be a part-time pastor. You can share your pastor with other churches. Like, there are a lot of different ways that you can have this pastor, but without the pastor, Luther says, it's not the church. And then we have worship, which I don't think any of us would agree with. If a church doesn't engage in worship together, that's the most noticeable element for not just us, but I think for most churches. And then suffering. And this, he's saying, 7th, the holy Christian people are externally recognized by the possession of the cross, that we endure misfortune and persecution and trials and evil from the devil, the world, and the flesh. And this is something Christ says. He says, the world hated me, so it's going to hate you. This is something we're promised. So Luther says the church is marked by the reality that we endure these sufferings. So again, that's all kind of above and beyond what the Smalcald article defines it as, but those are 7 marks of the church that I think are worth thinking about. And to be fair, it is something else that Luther put out there. So if you have comments, if you have questions, if you have concerns, go ahead and put them in the section below. And regardless, brothers and sisters, go in peace, serve the Lord. Thanks be to God.